Welcome back to another episode of the Max Term Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch. And today we are wrapping up the NHL trade deadline. Trades that were made, trades that were not made. I think that's probably where more of the discussion is going to be. Potentially, maybe a few players that might be on the move in the summer or who were floated. There's smoke around now and then maybe will be moved in this summer. Appreciate you listening. Max Term Podcast available on all major podcast platforms. Our content, including our contract projections, is available on X, Blue Sky, Threads, and most importantly, housed in one convenient location. That's afpanalytics.com. And AFP Analytics is the handle for all those social media. If you are a subscriber on our AFP Analytics, we call it Max Access. You get for $28 a year or $3 a month. You get access to all contract projection, including comps, tax, as well as graphics for the contracts and our max stat kind of skill tool. We still haven't come up with a great way to describe that, but max stat, which I guess we kind of, it's not war, but it's kind of trying to give a well-rounded representation of a player's skills. I guess that's the best way I can put it. And we appreciate you subscribing. If you have any questions or issues, feel free to reach out to us via social medias or submitting a contact with your email through the website, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. So, NHL trade deadline, I think there was more smoke than fire. And I think maybe one of the biggest points of it was a move that didn't end up being made, and we'll get there very shortly. But we're going to basically start talking about trades coming out of the Olympic break and kind of work through ones that were made between the Olympic, kind of the end of the roster freeze until the trade deadline. Might kind of jump around a little bit as it might make sense to lump some teams or something together, but that's kind of the plan. So we'll skip the first deal that was made after the roster freeze was lifted because that was an AHL change of scenery swap.
Yeah, so that leads us right into a somewhat bigger deal and maybe a little bit of a surprise, just the magnitude of the players involved. Maybe a player you weren't expecting to get dealt. So that was when Colorado sent Sam Girard and a second round pick to Pittsburgh for Brett Kulak, which right away, phenomenal work by Kyle Dubas. Almost kind of getting Kulak back in that goalie trade just to make money work. And ultimately, he played pretty well for Pittsburgh. And it kind of turned into a real nice situation for them to be able to flip him.
Getting Girard, who has a little bit of term still left on his contract, at a fairly reasonable cap hit at this point. He's not the same player he once was, but still an impactful enough player. But they also get a second round pick. Pittsburgh does in return for in this trade, and I think that's the kind of big win for them. Is it was a straight Kulak for Girard swap. I don't think many people are kind of questioning this move, but Pittsburgh getting a pick, home run for them.
Yeah, and Girard, it'll be interesting to see because some of the fun offense hasn't quite been there as much on his part, but his numbers have still been decent being on Colorado. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how his game translates over. I mean, we have post deadline here, but even next season, seeing how he does in Pittsburgh, if he can kind of translate that game to a new team.
I think moving on to the next kind of, I guess, we'll combine a couple here because Edmonton and Chicago linked up for two trades within 48 hours or so. So they started with Edmonton sending their 2028 second round pick to Chicago for Connor Murphy. I believe was there retention in that trade? Does and not a big deal either way. And then they circled back and sent a first round pick in Andrew Mangiapane to Chicago and acquired Doc, Colton Doc, that is, and Jason Dickinson, good third line center.
Yeah, so did check there was retention. So Murphy's deal went down to 2.2, I believe. That was 50% retained. I think that deal was kind of viewed as a solid deal. You get a right shot defenseman. Generally, he's responsible defensively, a little bit of physicality. So second round pick, a few drafts from now, 2028. That's probably fair for both sides, especially with that retention being involved. And then getting to the second trade, that's where I think there was a little more of a debate of how what happened here. So it was kind of seeming like to get rid of Mangiapane, there was going to need to be some type of asset attached to him. So it's hard to judge exactly what kind of value is being used for that because, I mean, we can start with Doc quickly, young fourth liner who can kind of provide some physicality, just that playoff type player. But then, as you mentioned, Dickinson being one of the, I mean, clear 3C, but one of the better defensive 3Cs just across the NHL. There's probably not a big amount of let's call that first round pick if we're splitting that apart. Like Dickinson might go for a second, like
Yeah.
a solid second rounder. So maybe a little bit of that first round pick is kind of extra value thrown Chicago's way to take Mangiapane, but for what Edmonton needed, like that, I like them making this deal. It's going to be a very late first, anyways, and it's next year. Teams tend to be okay, kind of punting away future picks.
What is interesting? I mean, they should be fine, but there could end up being very minimal protections if something catastrophic does happen. Where again, let's not go there, but most likely late first round pick in a slightly weaker draft. But it does if somehow Edmonton does not make the playoffs this year, it makes the pick that San Jose is due to receive for them basically unprotected this year. So there's a little bit of risk in both as they kind of now have two unprotected first round picks out there, but you still have Connor McDavid under contract for this season, and then two others. So you better be putting those chips in. And as you said, Jason Dickinson is probably an ideal fit for what they needed. A lot of people in Edmonton were talking about how this allows them to not play Ryan Nugent Hopkins as the third line center, put him up in the lineup a little bit higher on the wing, and that's probably going to help them balance out things and actually have a matchup line that maybe was lacking a little bit before this move.
I will say quickly, there is a level of protection on that 2027 first. So if things did really go down south, I know you don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much here, but if certain players started to be unhappy and things went very south, I believe it's top 12 protected. So there's a level of safeguard there with that pick.
If they were to trade their 2028 first round at some point, then that's where the it becomes very unprotected. So
Yeah.
we're starting to get into some what ifs. So not a big should be a late first round pick. And
Yeah.
they absolutely had to get out of that Andrew Mangiapane contract. We won't go too much for down that rabbit hole, but a lot of bad decisions have kind of led to Edmonton having to trade away some of these picks that would be nice for them to use elsewhere or actually build up their prospect pool a little bit.
Right. Kind of going back into the chronological order here. Nashville and Vegas linked up with a, we'll call it fourth line move. Cole Smith from Nashville, who has had some solid numbers, just hasn't had much opportunity. But I think it's a sneaky good pickup versus just trading for the pure grit fourth liner who that's all he's really good for. Cole Smith has a little bit more to him. They traded a 2028 third and Christopher Sadoff, who I want to
Yeah, they
say,
got him back.
oh, they got him back. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, Nashville acquired, sorry, a 2028 third and Christopher Sadoff, who I believe is a 24-year-old defenseman. So probably not a ton of, at this point, potential, but maybe a good AHL move.
or just helping Vegas clear a contract spot. That's probably all it is. But
True.
I
So
think we
it's
maybe,
basically Cole Smith for a third.
yeah, I think maybe we run down all Nashville's trades before moving on because Nashville end up in sell-off mode, but didn't end up necessarily not many big moves.
Right.
So they also that same evening, basically simultaneously, traded Michael McCarron to Minnesota for a 2028 second round pick. Then, what a day later, sent Nick Blankenberg to Colorado for a 2027 fifth round pick. And then their final sell off move was sending Michael Bunting to the Dallas Stars for a 2026 third round pick. And I think that those were ultimately the moves, basically all pending unrestricted free agents, pure rentals, and generally I would say they got good value back.
For the most part. So, I mean, Cole Smith, that was good. McCarron, I think that surprised a lot of people, actually, getting a second for him. I think that's at least fair value. If not, they did pretty well there with Minnesota. The Blankenberg one is interesting because this is a player. Well, let's start here actually with Colorado. So they've got Sam Malinsky, who has kind of been very good third pair defenseman, producing, has clear offensive ability. It's a little smaller, 5'11". I hate saying that as someone that's 5'11",
Yeah,
a little
join the
smaller, but
club.
for the NHL, like getting a fifth for him felt a little off, but or sorry, I skipped a little bit there. So Malinsky's 5'11". He gets a deal
And a quarter
mil.
ish, something like that. Yeah.
It might have been 4.75 actually. That's sticking out
I'll
in my
fact
head.
check while you.
Okay. So they give Malinsky that deal. Instantly right away when we were doing our projections, we were like, okay, we need to go look at how this impacts Blankenberg because he's having a very similar year. It's not to the level of what Malinsky's doing, but Malinsky's also with the Colorado Avalanche versus the Nashville Predators. So we ultimately adjusted Blankenberg's deal, brought him up a little bit, I think just into the 4 million mark. He goes for a fifth. And I think that's purely based on the size of the player. I think Blankenberg's 5'9", so even a little smaller than Malinsky. And we've kind of talked about it. We won't go too far down the rabbit hole here on this episode. We might need to adjust slightly based on the size of the players, especially now it seems like there's been an adjustment back to bigger players, especially on the blue line. What Blankenberg is providing to have him as essentially an extra defenseman is huge for Colorado, especially at that price. That's essentially a dart throw. So I love that move for Colorado. I think any contender should have been on that move, been willing to top that pick. And for Nashville, if this is what was out there and they weren't going to end up being able to re-sign him, it's hard to say it is what it is. It's hard to take that viewpoint and understand it. But if they weren't going to resign him, get what you can for him.
Malinsky, you were correct. 4 by 475 was his extension. And kind of as you were talking about McCarron there, kind of thinking of the deal Edmonton did to get Dickinson. McCarron was a second. Dickinson for a first makes sense. And
Yes.
then especially by the time you add in the kind of salary dump. But I guess really kind of comparing that, the McCarron trade and the Dickinson trade, like that that actually is pretty seems pretty fair value for Edmonton there.
Yeah. It makes sense with what was done at the deadline. It's just, I think initially it was catching people off guard a little bit because it does seem like a rich price when you start throwing around first round picks. But sometimes that's what it takes, especially to get players with a clear specialty. Like it would be fair to say Dickinson's defensive ability as a center is elite. He's playing to that level this year on a Chicago team. It's not good defensively. Last trade with Nashville was Bunting. This one's interesting because if you would ask me what would he go for, I'd probably say a second or a third. He ends up getting a third in this year's draft. At the same time, when you start looking around at the other prices, it is kind of like only a third for Bunting. I think he's also kind of one of those quieter, well, he's not really a quiet player per se. More
No.
so his underlying stats. He's generally strong on both ends of the ice. I think in that regard, he's a little bit of a quieter guy, kind of sneaks past people. They don't realize he's a pretty solid hockey player. Top nine, probably winger. Just kind of depends where you need him in the lineup. I like that move a lot for Dallas. It's more depth scoring.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a perfect fit for Dallas, and I'd say keep that 2026 third round price in mind, and then kind of as we go, we'll kind of do would you rather have Michael Bunting or player X, Y, and Z? And I think you're right. I think the answer is Michael Bunting is going to be the answer for that question a lot of times.
We can jump back chronologically here, and we could sort of get into the whole no trade clause, no move clause
Yeah,
conversation because that became very popular at this deadline. So the first one, and to me this was slightly different. I'll explain why. First one was Tyler Myers. So it kind of comes out Vancouver's willing to move pretty much anyone on their roster. Tyler Myers, all of a sudden, it's out there that they're finding some deals and are looking to have him waive his trade clause. I believe it was Detroit initially.
correct. Yeah,
So that was the first one that kind of got leaked before the player agreed. At the same time, and I don't, this doesn't fully excuse it leaking, but at that point in time, it was also already known that he was going to be scratched, and not because he was hurt, specifically because a trade was coming. So that kind of being out there already, it doesn't full on put the pressure on as much as this team is trying to trade for him. Will he waive? That's a little more pressure in comparison to some other guys. I think it being known he was going to be scratched and kind of like a move was potentially coming. Not quite as bad, but he used his trade clause as is his right. So stopped the deal to Detroit. Likely made it clear some teams he'd be willing to go to, and Dallas was obviously one of those. So Dallas gets Myers for a second in 2027 and a fourth round pick in 2029. Decent work from Vancouver. Like Myers is probably an ideal third liner at this point, and they just need to start acquiring assets. So getting a second rounder, I think, is fine for Vancouver.
I was kind of joking. The 2029 fourth is really not that much additional.
Oh,
So the
right.
the second's
Yeah.
not insignificant.
Just real quick, I was going to say the Connor Murphy trade kind of set that right up, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, difference. Myers has an additional year than Murphy.
Yeah.
One thing I kind of will say on the Myers before we get into the other no trade clause discussion is the reporting on Myers felt a little less strong and definite in that the trade, like they kind of was like, well, there's a trade on the table and it's been presented to Myers, opposed to the next trade that did end up going through as well. Mackenzie Weegar to Utah, compensation started to leak out and very strongly confirmed that the trade was agreed to. And that was before the player waived his no trade clause. So a little bit of a contrast there. And then we'll talk about the
Yeah.
trade that didn't happen in a second. But Uyghur to Utah, Calgary went for quantity over quality here. And not to say they got bad quality, but 3 second round picks, New York Rangers being the headliner one that should be fairly high in the second round. Ottawa, which probably is going to be mid, and then Utah's own second, which will be probably on the later end of the second round. Prospect and Jonathan Castagna and Olimata for a body on the blue line, basically.
Yep. I yeah, so that trade in general, I think it's probably fine. Like if you were gonna go and add up all the values of those picks, like you're getting into the first round value wise, whether they're actually able to use those picks and get into the first round, maybe, maybe not. I think with Uyghur, he's still a very good player. There was some concern about the term that was on his contract that was kind of put out there a little bit that was making things a little tough for teams. So whether this was good or not for Calgary really depends on like what truly is their direction. Because if they think they're close, I don't know if I would have made this specific deal. If they were really kind of thinking, all right, let's get what we can for our veterans who are getting a little bit older, I guess they did what they could. For Utah, I love it because they've been stockpiling assets. They're good now. Might as well move some second round picks. You've got a bunch. You've already made a bunch of picks. You have a clear need on your team. Uyghur's still very good. So I like it for Utah. Oh,
People in our mentions were kind of like, oh, Uyghur's defensive game's declining just a little bit. And I mean, I guess, but I think you're judging a little too harshly on the situation he kind of was in Calgary. I don't know. I think
I will
that's
say
good for
this.
Utah.
Our max stat has his defensive impact not where it usually is this year. It's below average a little bit at 40%, and he's usually in the 80s or higher. He had 1 year in the 50s in the past 4 seasons. But again, I think it would be very fair, as you pointed out, to say, well, hey, look what's going on with Calgary right now. And on top of that, most of the other metrics that we have on our max stat, he is very good, to the point where when we kind of combine them all into our max stat, he's ranked 97 percentile defenseman in the NHL. He's a good player to have on your team still. I think that kind of leads us into what you were referring to, the trade that ultimately did not happen. That was between St. Louis and Buffalo, not Robert Thomas. It was the Colton Parayko trade, or we can even call it that because technically it was not a trade that happened.
Proposal, the trade proposal.
Proposal. Yeah. So it seemed like everything was done. In general, it was Parayko for a first, and it's believed to be recently drafted Radim Murka, the
Czech defenseman,
I was gonna
eighth
say like
overall pick in
eighth. Okay.
2025 for Buffalo. Ninth.
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 That's where I
Sorry.
was going. I couldn't remember the pick.
Yeah.
Regardless, high pick in the draft. So very good defensive prospect and a first round pick. So essentially two firsts and one of them's pretty good. I think there was a lot of a reaction amongst fans. Like that's kind of a steep price for Pareko. There was also, I think, on the other side of it, a fairly significant amount of people kind of pointing out, hey, he's one of the best defensemen that you are going to get. And that's not just looking at who was available, that's just looking at the NHL. Defensively, he's very, very good. There's some pieces of his game that you might not like as much. That's more so the offensive end. Uh, but as far as needing a reliable right shot defenseman, not going to do a whole lot better through a trade than acquiring Pareko.
One point that I just want to point out as well, things are being reported about the return. Merca seemed to be confirmed in the return, but what we don't know is what year that first round pick was, and we don't know if there was going to be salary retention.
Yeah.
Both of which would have probably dramatically influenced how people would have felt about that trade. Like if it was a 2028 or 2029 first round pick and St. Louis retaining half of the salary on Parayko, I think there's a different mentality than, oh, it's a first round pick this year and your first round pick from last year for him at full price. Like those are two very, very opposite ends of the spectrum, like the reaction, in my opinion, to kind of how that plays out.
Yeah, for sure. One thing, so I guess continuing with the whole trade clause thing, this came out, deals agreed to, waiting on Pareko to waive, was essentially all the reports. It started coming out pretty quickly. Some St. Louis writers, specifically Jeremy Rutherford of The Athletic, was, in my opinion, very informative throughout kind of the whole, call it drama of this. Pareko is not the type of person that's going to just wave. He's much more so the type of person that this is going to take a long time to figure out. He needs time if he's going to wave. Ultimately decided not to. And I will say Rutherford, if you subscribe to The Athletic, put out a very interesting article about this entire process. Quotes from, I believe, Armstrong, St. Louis's GM, quotes from Jarmo Kekalainen, the Sabres GM, and I believe from Pareko himself,
And his
um,
agent as well.
and his agent. So just a lot of insight into what happened here. I thought it was a very cool article to read, specifically because you could see the respect of everyone involved. It wasn't this situation where someone walks away super mad. It is what it is. Players have this right, and they can use it whenever they would like, as long as that's active in their contract. So yeah, this is ultimately kind of the big splash trade that didn't happen. At least more definitive trade because, as I mentioned, we weren't going to talk about Robert Thomas here. He was one that was out there that ultimately did not happen, but this was much more. It was at the 1 yard line and just didn't get. They threw the ball instead of handing it to Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's Malcolm Butler with the interception.
Anything you want to add on the whole either Pareko or just trade clauses in general?
So I think players, if teams are going to give this as a negotiating ploy, I'm glad that a player actually invoked it and said, no, I would prefer not to do that. Especially someone with term. It's okay. I'm not going to say that they should automatically waive if their contracts expire, and that's not fair. That's not fair to say to them. But someone with term who's earned a no trade clause and the ability to control their destination, has every right and should make that the best decision for them. If St. Louis knew that they wanted to potentially move off of this contract, well, maybe they should have had another $1 million per year given to Parayko instead of giving him this trade clause. I'm just spitballing what that amount would be. I don't necessarily,
Yeah,
we haven't necessarily ran what that value works out to, but if if St. Louis wants flexibility in being able to move him, I mean, you don't give him the trade clause, give him more money. Like that's how it works out. And he earned every right to include that in his contract. And I mean, again, it's just like it's a player exercising what he's earned. And it's hard to be upset about that. I think what's interesting to just note is it's very rare that the player actually invokes it and says no. I mean, I guess maybe there's times that it doesn't come out as strongly as it did, and we just don't know. It seemed like
right,
Dougie Hamilton over the summer maybe nixed the trade to San Jose, but it, I'm all for the players using it. I think it's a little bit it's tough. I know insiders have a job to do, and they're being told information wherever that information might come from. But it, I would have liked to have seen in the Uyghur and Colton Parayko situation, the insiders maybe pulling back a little bit and not putting out the full return. You can be first by saying Colton Parayko to Buffalo is gaining steam almost at the finish line. Like you can
yep.
be first by saying something like that, but now it's out that Raheem Mirko is going to be traded. So now that's out for like now he knows that if he wasn't
You
informed
you
before.
could even say a high, like a first and a high level prospect are on the table, but that's another point I think we should specifically touch on is you have a prospect who is just drafted, thought of very highly, and all of a sudden he's in trade rumors. He thinks he's going to a new team.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And
I
now he's
agree.
not. So it's like, what does my organization think of me? I'm sure it's not that like blunt. Sure, it's all smoothed over and like it is what it is. It's part of the business, but there's still that like they were about to trade me. So it's this isn't obviously it's not good for Buffalo not getting Parayko, but there's other parts of it leaking that are not good for Buffalo too.
Yeah,
Um, it's just not great all around.
I wouldn't necessarily. It's not necessarily a shot at the city. Like I wouldn't if you're from the area, I wouldn't take Colton Parayko saying no to coming to Buffalo as a shot at the city. He's a West Coast, like he's in Northwest Canada, born and raised, went to college in Alaska.
Yeah.
Him coming all the way to the East Coast, that there's reasons that he didn't want to come to the East Coast. Like, and again, that's within his right. So
Yep.
I wouldn't necessarily say that that was a shot at Buffalo, whatever you want to say. It was just, I think he's more comfortable out west, and that's, again, his right. Probably should move this along a little more quickly, or we're going to be here all night recording this episode.
Yeah. Here's a couple trades that involve Nick Dowd to Vegas for a second, a third, and a prospect goalie.
Did Vegas make any other moves besides Smith and Dowd?
Want to say it was just those
It
two.
was those two. Yeah, that was it. To
So just
me,
kind of depth in their forward group, which that's what they need.
they need depth, but they also maybe need slightly higher quality depth. I know that
Yeah.
it's tough to do that, but they got two fourth line guys. I think that both are very good fourth line guys,
Yeah.
but I would have liked to have seen maybe someone that they could have slid in on their third line, or
More of a
maybe someone.
scorer. Yeah.
That's where I was going, yeah, or someone who can maybe help them put the puck in the net because they got two very good defensive guys, but that just doesn't seem to be their. Not saying it wasn't a need, but I would have maybe liked them to see them use the assets a little bit different.
I will say there was a lot of noise around them for a goalie. maybe improving their defense up front is sort of their indirect way of trying to address the other team scoring. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see. The next trade also involves a Nick Waugh from Toronto to Colorado. So this was the first move up front for Colorado. At this point in time, kind of think made everyone settle in a little bit. Like, okay, Colorado made their move. Like that's their big move here. They traded a first round pick in 2027 to Toronto plus a fifth this year for Nick Waugh. Historically, he's a solid 3C. Hasn't had it was not the greatest fit with Toronto, I should say. But reputation wise, I think led to a first round pick being needed here. So I liked that pickup. When you look at like Dickinson went for a first, you it's like okay, we probably need to get there for Wah. So like value wise, okay, I like it. It's gonna be a late first. It's Colorado. And then on Toronto's side, players that you're not going to resign. I'm sure they talked to Wah's agent a little bit, and if you're not going to resign where they are right now, you flip them.
Well, what's interesting with Nick Waugh, he has this year and next still on his
Does he?
contract. Yeah, he's not a pure rental, so that's
Ooh,
actually, and his cap hit's only $3 million. So for Colorado, that's really good value.
it is.
And Toronto, I think, did fairly well to recoup something here, especially. So basically, they traded Mitch Marner for a first round pick. That's what it breaks down to.
Yeah, when it's all said and done. Yep. I kind of want to stick with Colorado here
Yeah, I might
because
as well finish him out.
that was kind of
They
as I
could
said,
be
I assumed they were
done.
done. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which they had space still, but it was kind of like, okay, you gave up a first here, you added multiple defensemen in the past couple weeks. You don't need a goalie. I figured they were done. Very, very last minute, it was announced Nazem Kadri's back in Colorado, along with a fourth round pick in 2027. Calgary gives up a first in 20, or sorry, Calgary acquires a first in 2028, a second in 2027, a prospect Max Curran, and off the roster Victor Olofsson was sent back to Calgary. I'm assuming that was just kind of roster space. Olofsson has to go back the other way. He was fine for Colorado, but I think he was just fine where it made sense. Offset, send him back. What's interesting about this is it, I'm curious how they ultimately look once we get to playoff time up front. Because the other thing with acquiring Nick Waugh first, it's like, all right, they've got McKinnon, Brock Nelson, Nick Waugh down the middle, Jack Drury probably 4C. And okay, now we're throwing Nazem Kadri in there too. Who who goes to the wing? We'll see.
I
What
wonder
you
if it's
reference
Brock Nelson. I wonder if it's Brock Nelson that goes to the wing, given he did that a little bit at the Olympics with Team USA. And then Kadri plays two, Nick Waugh plays three, Jack Drury plays four. I don't know. Just spitballing there.
possibly. I'd be willing to bet it's Nelson or Kadri, honestly,
Yeah, potentially.
because I think you're leaving McKinnon at center with Natchez, and then I don't think you're dropping either of Nelson or Kadri to a third line. So, yeah, it's going to be one of those guys. It might make a lot of sense that it's Nelson, as you said, because of the Four Nations and Olympic deployment. But yeah, so Colorado, that's just a fun deadline for them. Earlier today, as we're recording earlier, couple hours, a poll ended that we had posted. Didn't amplify it too much, got around 75 votes, I think, but asking fans to essentially tell us, hey, who won the deadline? Which team had the best deadline? Colorado was listed, Dallas was, Minnesota was, and then we said other. Go ahead and comment and tell us. Colorado won this poll with 85%. I think that's fair. You get Brett Kulak, you make I guess technically a depth defenseman acquisition in Nick Blankenberg, who's had a very good year. You acquire Nick Waugh, who's great to have in your bottom six. And as you mentioned specifically, that's not just a this season move, that's a next season move. Everyone thinks you're done and you pull off Nazem Kadri too. And like up front looks completely different adding both of those players. I don't know what more they could have done. And I think when you can say that for a team, that's they did very well at the deadline.
Yeah, maybe you referenced before we started recording. Oh, not even a single goalie wasn't traded. Maybe adding a third NHL veteran goalie to the mix, not necessarily to be playing, but a break glass in case of emergency
Yeah,
option. Maybe that's the perfect deadline for them, like an Eric Comrie or something for just
right,
insurance. But that's the only maybe place that I could say not 10 out of 10, but 9.9 out of 10.
right. And that's not even a move that anyone made. So you could question, was that even out there to be made?
Yeah,
Maybe, maybe not. But yeah, so Colorado did pretty well there. Jumping back in line here.
Petrie to Minnesota for a seventh round pick. That's just Minnesota some depth. Minnesota
Yep.
also acquired Nick Foligno for nothing. So
Yeah.
Chicago did right by Foligno to just send him to play with his brother and have it a legitimate shot at winning a Stanley Cup. I think that was Minnesota's. Oh, one more. Let's finish out Minnesota here because they had one that was pretty interesting. I guess they sent Vinny Hinostroza out. We won't worry too much about that. The kind of first move on deadline day, at least in the morning when Trade Center was on, was a 1-for-1 swap. David Juracek out, Bobby Brink in. Minnesota had given up quite a bit to acquire Juracek a couple years ago from Columbus and are able to flip him after he has not really gained a foothold in the NHL. So they're able to flip him and get. I like Brink as a middle six option. I like him a
Yeah.
lot as a middle six option. So maybe there's something still there with Juracek, but the way that that's trending to get a player Brink's magnitude and value, that to me was a very very smart savvy move from Bill Guerin.
Yeah, I was gonna say where I was expecting Juracek's value to be, I think they did very well, recouping what they ultimately gave up. For Philly, like they need defensemen, so hopefully it clicks there. They had an abundance of wingers, so I kind of get the mindset behind going for this framework. It's just a question of what was this the right player to do this for? Time will tell. We'll see. I will say in Juracek's defense, in both Columbus and Minnesota, he hasn't necessarily been given a larger role. Now, we won't go down the rabbit hole too far, but Philadelphia ultimately not moving Ristolainen. Kind of all of a sudden, Philly has an abundance of right shot defensemen. So there's a little bit of, I'm just curious, like, is he in a better situation now? I don't know. I think he needs a little bit of a bigger role where they let him kind of have a little more of a offensive impact to like let him play the game versus he's the bottom pair guy, which we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it's a chicken or the egg. Like you need to earn your role, but at some point you also need to be given an opportunity to show that you're worthy of that role.
Yep.
And it was always odd from the start with Minnesota acquiring him with kind of the assets that they had in the blue line. And then once they went and got Quinn Hughes, writing definitely seemed on the wall, but it seemed like he had already been passed internally by David Spacek. So yeah, it made sense for Minnesota to move on.
A couple trades that I think can kind of be grouped together, and this is from Ottawa's perspective. I believe the way this actually went down was I think David Perron was moved first to
Yeah,
Detroit for
yeah,
a fourth round pick in this year's draft.
yeah.
He's solid still. He's okay. He's not what he once was. I think it's not just acquiring the on ice player, but what he means for the locker room to Detroit. This is not his first stint in Detroit. A lot of the guys there know him. So, like, it's, I think, just as much a locker room move, bring in the veteran with some leadership as it is an on ice thing. So, I don't mind that from Detroit's perspective. Then Ottawa kind of turns around and says, all right, we moved Perron for a fourth. Ottawa then moves a second and a third, both in this year's draft, for the Kings third in this year's draft and Warren Fogle. Warren Fogel's interesting because he's got one more year left on his deal. Great defensive impact. The offense has not been there at all this year. You could argue a little bit of a just LA Kings thing there. Most of
Yeah.
the Kings have had struggles offensively this year. So I like it as kind of a bet. I do want to mention, as I listed off those picks involved, I believe those third rounds are just
It's a potential pick swap.
I think it's a potential pick swap. By default, Los Angeles will receive the better of Ottawa's third round pick or Washington's third round pick. However, if
There's some conditions. Yeah,
there's a lot, I won't read through that too much, but
it seems like LA is basically going to be able to move up about 10 to 15 picks in round three, in
yes.
addition to getting Buffalo's 2026 second round pick, which is trending to be actually fairly low.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's fine. I don't mind it for either team. I think it's somewhat savvy, maybe from Ottawa's perspective, to get an asset for Perron and then replace him with Fogle, especially if they're looking to improve a little bit defensively
Yeah,
overall. Fogle does that,
yeah.
plus has the extra year.
I like the player fit for Ottawa. I'm a little surprised that how much they gave up, given that LA seemingly was looking to dump the asset, but I think it's
Yeah,
fine.
I think that was it for Ottawa. So that's going to move us a little bit south within the same division to
Yeah,
the Buffalo Sabres.
yeah.
So we mentioned, well, really, they were kind of in on Robert Thomas, it seemed, wasn't going to happen. In on Parayko, really seemed like it was going to happen, didn't. They kind of pivoted away a little bit from the flashy move and just decided, all right, we're a playoff team. Let's make those playoff team type trades. A third and a sixth, both in this year's draft, off to New York, the Rangers, I should specify, for Sam Carrick, fourth liner. It's been good defensively this year. Brings that classic physicality, grit, whatever you want to call it, that most playoff teams look for. So with Winnipeg, they move Jacob Bryson, a depth defenseman, Isak Rosén. I might not have quite said that last name right, but
Yeah, Rosane.
s- solid prospect. Was an AHL All Star this year. Ultimately, Buffalo just kind of running out of space up front on their NHL roster. So I think it was like 16 games ish that he played for Buffalo this year, but there wasn't any consistent opportunity, and there probably wasn't going to be in the future either.
And this was his last year of waiver exemption.
Yep.
So in order, if he did not make the NHL roster next year, as you said, which seemed unlikely, he probably was hitting waivers and probably someone would have picked him up for free.
Yep.
Also good to do nice by the player to give him an opportunity to make an NHL impact.
Yep. So Buffalo also sends a 2027 second in this trade as well. So a couple decent assets and a an NHL roster defenseman, albeit more so a depth guy in Bryson. Buffalo gets back two bigger physical defensemen. Logan Stanley is probably if we're gonna say there's a centerpiece to this deal, he's the centerpiece. Left shot 6'6", 6'7".
All I know is he looked very much bigger than Dan Dunleavy on
Yeah.
the TV broadcast against Tampa Bay.
So Stanley and then Shen's probably more of like I don't know how much he'll play, but both of them, I should say, are thought of as good locker room guys, good guys to add here. So that is kind of more of the grit, toughness, physicality type move, similar to the Carrick move for them. So Buffalo makes that deal, and then kind of right at the end of the deadline, they sneak in another deal as well with Winnipeg, where they traded a late round pick. Let's
I think
see,
it was a seven.
was
I
it a
don't know
seven?
which
Yeah,
year.
it was a seven in this year's draft for Tanner Pearson. So Pearson might have a touch of offensive ability still in his game, but he's likely another kind of depth extra forward to have along. Big key thing here that actually might have been good to mention. NHL rosters are expanded, so as long as you're cap compliant, you can carry however many people. So adding these depth guys, it works if you're cap compliant on the season. And then even in the playoffs, this year's kind of new. You can't just be over the cap, but what team you are dressing has to be cap compliant
Yeah, so
specifically.
as long as you can carry however many guys right now, that means you'll be fine in the
Yeah,
playoffs, basically.
exactly.
Well, as long as there's not a major injury, which at this point Buffalo is not using any long-term injured reserve space, so
Yep.
no issues there.
Yeah, so Buffalo, like, there's mixed reviews. I mean, you could kind of go back and forth with what is good and what is bad about someone like a Logan Stanley. Ultimately, they swung big. It didn't work out, so they went for those playoff type additions, which it's what teams do.
Well, they still went big, getting
Well,
the 6'7" Logan
sure,
Stanley.
sure. Okay, where are we here?
Connor
Couple big
Garland,
ones. Yeah.
yeah. Connor Garland to Columbus for I what felt like a pretty light return when all said and done. A second and third in this year's draft, which Columbus is right on the border of the playoffs, so that's going to be probably mid round at best for Vancouver. So those two for Connor Garland, it seemed like Vancouver instantly had buyer's remorse with.
Second round's 2028.
Oh, my eyes
Yeah.
are. Oh man. Okay.
That's down the road a little bit.
Yeah.
The third round's this year, but still, like, I would say even more so what you are
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Vancouver buyer's remorse almost instantly. seemingly on that contract.
We'll see, because like again, that's a team with Vancouver. Like nothing was really going well, so it's very possible Garland rebounds and is solid and
Yeah,
produces well enough that 6 by 6 is fine.
yeah. The only, I guess, the risk for Columbus is if he does not fit well, that's might be a doozy to get out of. But the way the cap's rising, it should be fine.
Yep. Another big one, which this was, I think, fun to see for, I guess I obviously we're Sabres fans, but I like rooting for the Ducks. They're like my late night team
Yeah,
this year. John Carlson to the Anaheim Ducks.
shocked the hockey insider world, but not shocked shocking to if you actually listen to the Max Term podcast, you would know
True.
that the hockey outsiders here were talking about this as a possibility for a couple weeks now. So I guess
We
who
let
are
off an episode with John Carlson being on a trade board, on our
yep,
trade board. Like,
yep,
um, yeah. So we had a little bit of fun to however many people actually saw it on X. I think it was Pierre LeBrun kind of put out there like no one saw this coming, or we're like, well, we
yeah.
kind of did. Yeah.
Yeah, so who's the real hockey insider and who's the real hockey
All
outsider in
right.
this situation?
It was pretty well known that extension talks were not progressing at all or even happening at times. And it just kind of made sense. Where is Winnipeg? Where is Washington in the standings? Not in an ideal spot right now. They're kind of able to cash in a little bit here, get a first round pick this year's while it is protected. I believe Anaheim can shift it to 2027 if they miss the playoffs this year. But
Yeah,
still, to if you're ultimately not resigning a player like John Carlson to still get a first round pick and a third in 2027, like decent value. For Anaheim, I think it's interesting because they had they were kind of full at defense, but just a lot of young players. I know they've got Truba and Gudis, so Carlson coming in is kind of another like a little bit older right shot guy, but not the same type of player as those other two. Carlson's bringing the offense still. So maybe helps take a little pressure off some of the younger guys. I don't as much mean Lacombe anymore because he's so good already, but maybe more so the Zellweger, the Minchikov, the younger guys who are still trying to establish their game are not necessarily needing to be like those top power play quarterbacks right away. Carlson can come in and take one of those roles.
yeah. I like and also question a little bit the fit for the reasons you laid out. I think it makes sense for Anaheim this year. It makes a lot of sense. But it's Ian Moore, the young, promising defenseman, has
Yeah,
already been playing shifts at forward this year because they have an abundance of players there. It's not going to help his development. You're going
true.
to squeeze one of the other guys, whether it's Drew Hellison, whether it's the Minchikov, whether it's the Zellweger, you're going to squeeze one of them out of a bigger role. So I I think that it makes sense for Anaheim to add some experience and add a good player. I think I would have rather seen them swing up front, but I at the same time I don't necessarily have a name. Like my rule is always if you want to see something happen, you got to have a name, and I don't know if I can give you a name for who was traded that fits that, but
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen maybe another forward to with that same logic to take some pressure off of some of the younger forwards instead.
So they were a difficult team. As we're recording this, they're first in the Pacific.
Yeah,
Even up front, there was a bit of a logjam. Like
yeah,
they ended up moving Strome to
yeah,
Calgary,
yeah,
just kind of a do right, like get him somewhere where he doesn't have to play fourth line minutes.
yeah.
So like it was difficult going in for me to pick Anaheim to acquire anyone because it wasn't clear that like there wasn't a defensive spot open. There wasn't really a forward spot open. I think the Carlson move's kind of a signal like, hey, you're right at the top of the division. Let's try and push for it. Kind of a good supporting move that locker rooms like, and I think that could be really good for a lot of the younger players there too. So we'll see if it pays off. To me, it's fun. Like I like seeing teams that haven't been good for a little while like get to this point. So I like it.
I
Oh
don't dislike it, but yeah,
no,
it's
but I get how you're kind of saying it's not quite a perfect fit. Like that's fair.
if you want to know why Washington did it, go back and listen to our first trade deadline preview because we laid out the logic for that. Basically, it boils down to Cole Hudson's coming.
Yeah. Well, so and the other thing Washington did, which was a little interesting, so they make the Dowd trade, get some decent assets. I believe that was a second and a third from Vegas.
Yeah,
They make this Carlson trade for a first and a third. I'm getting confused in my head trying to list all this out. Then they go and they acquire Timothy Liljegren from the San Jose Sharks for a fourth round pick. And they acquire in a trade with Vancouver, David Kampf for a sixth round pick. So they kind of like had these more so premium assets, we'll call it, veteran players that they could get good picks for, and then turned around and used some later round picks to kind of fill in their spot, almost in a way to sort of say, like, okay, we're not completely throwing in the towel right now, but we're acknowledging that this year isn't our best year. So let's get some NHL pieces, try and stay competitive, maybe sneak into the playoffs here. You never know what could happen. But let's make sure we don't lose Carlson for nothing.
it's rapid fire a few trades.
Yep.
Corey Perry back to Tampa for a second. I think that's good work by the Kings to get a second round pick there. They're very much on the bubble. Perry will be fine in Tampa. I think one thing to question with Tampa, we saw it on display last night against Buffalo, is their overall foot speed. They've had trouble with the Sabres' speed 2 games in a row now.
Yeah.
So adding Corey Perry is not going to help that, but at the same time, Perry is obviously a proven playoff winner.
True.
Pittsburgh acquires Elmer Soderblom for a third round pick from Detroit. I love that gamble for Pittsburgh. It hasn't worked, but Pittsburgh's been accumulating assets. So get a younger player who maybe with a little bit more opportunity could show something. Philly sends Nick Delorier to play some playoff games in Carolina.
That's fun.
Well, maybe not play, but be on the
Well,
roster for some playoff games in
he might.
Carolina.
He
He
might
might
sneak
play.
in there. Good for him, by the way. Just kind of being on some losing teams for a majority of his career.
I'm going to skip a couple St. Louis trades
Yep.
in the vein of Washington filling out some of their depth guys. Timothy Liljegren to from San Jose for that a fourth round pick, as you kind of had already alluded to. Boston takes the chance on Lucas Reichel, sending a sixth round pick to Vancouver. I mean, is eventually we got to say it's not going to work for him, but at the same point, I like the idea of trying. And with Marco Sturm, the head coach in Boston, German descent, maybe there can be a connection and maybe something can kind of work and click with in Boston. And
He's
the fact
fast.
he's fast and Boston could use someone to kind of help in their middle six a little bit with a
Yeah.
little bit of offensive upside. So I think that's a very good low risk gamble for them. And then a couple more Toronto trades, and we'll finish with St. Louis. So Toronto selling their pending unrestricted free agents, Bobby McMahon to Seattle for a second, which was the one that they got for basically they turned the assets they got for Marchman earlier this year into McMahon. And then Toronto also got a third this year from the LA Kings for Scott Laughton. I question a little what LA's strategy was sending out Perry, sending out Fogle makes a little bit of sense with them turning around and bringing in Lawton. I don't know. That one
Yeah. It
the,
would have
the
made sense if they kept those other two and
yes.
they add Lauden. Because then
Yeah.
they're kind of trying to get better. But yeah, I fully agree. It's just kind of weird optic wise.
McMahon we had mixed thoughts on. I guess in a vacuum, I don't mind. I like the price that Seattle gave up. I like the player. He was actually maybe
Yeah.
my one of my more favorite wing ideas. I just kind of think it's Seattle getting McMahon is kind of funny because it's the same type of player that they always are acquiring.
Yeah.
And at some point, maybe try something a little different. Although this year things are going a little bit better for them, so we'll see how
They're
that kind of works out for them.
That's the thing. Like when we were talking about it we've been on Seattle for the past couple of years. Like they need elite talent, and that's not what McMahon is, but he was one of the better forwards available. They're in a wild card spot right now as of recording this. So let's call them fringe playoff team. They're fighting to get there. Things have not been great for Seattle since they've become a team. So I get kind of saying, all right, this is the best move we can make. As you said, I agree, solid price. I think a lot of people thought McMahon was going to go for a first. So while it doesn't fix what we kind of know their more glaring issue to be, there wasn't really a move, I think, out there for them to do. Like unless they were gonna somehow figure out the assets for Robert Thomas, like this was about the best they could do.
Yeah,
So I don't mind it.
it goes back to my tap the sign. You got a better idea. Well, tell me what the better idea is. And I guess I can't necessarily just, again, tell you a better idea because no one necessarily better was traded.
Yeah.
So, last two, we'll finish up with St. Louis, who's kind of been the overarching theme of this episode because the rebuild seemingly is on, but at the same time, they didn't move their biggest assets. And then Colton Parayko decided he did not want to be moved again within his right.
Yep.
So, and it was, I was a little bit interested to see if Buffalo would have pivoted to Justin Falk instead of Parayko. They ultimately chose not to. So Justin Falk ends up in Detroit, and Falk also had trade protection. So maybe he had told St. Louis, don't go down this path with me. I'm not interested. So Falk ends up in Detroit for a first round pick this year, third round pick from via San Jose this year, Justin Hole, which is just cap purpose, asset
Just tossing. Yeah.
toss in, and then prospect Dmitry Uchinkov, who I'm not going to pretend to know the first thing about, to be completely honest with you.
22-year-old, playing over in Russia, 23 points in 39 games. It could
So
end up being something. He's smaller though, 5'10",
yeah,
weights in the low 160s. Like we'll see. It's really the first round that's like the key part of this.
it seems like there's no protections on that first either. I mean, Detroit right now is in a playoff spot, so it shouldn't be an issue,
Yeah.
but they're also not comfortably in a playoff spot either.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because there is a little bit of separation. I feel like they should be able to at least hang on and be in the wild card spot because once you move outside of the wild card, like Ottawa's kind of there still, but there's time. There could be a little fluctuation. They can't go on a losing skid where they lose five in a row because then they'll be in trouble.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, we'll see. I think they'll be fine. That pick should be later. Well,
Yeah.
mid low to mid 20s probably.
And even if they do end up just dropping out, they probably end up as the with the worst lottery odds because the East is far outpacing the West in points. So
Yeah.
probably at worst, it's probably the absolute worst case scenario. It's probably like 16th, sixth overall because you can only move up 10 spots.
Yeah.
Like that's an absolute disaster
If
for
that were to
Detroit
happen.
if
Yeah.
that were to happen.
That's true.
So probably not too much of a concern, but it is interesting that are no protections in the world where everything seems to have some level of protection.
Yep.
And then the other trade St. Louis made was trading their captain, who just had to walk across the hotel lobby.
Yeah, that was interesting. How many
So he
times that's happened.
he went from St. Louis to the Islanders. Both were staying in the same hotel in San Jose at the time. And St. Louis gets back Colorado's 2026 first round pick, which the Islanders had acquired last year in the Brock Nelson trade. New Jersey's 2026 third round trade, which they had acquired for the Siplikov Palat move. St. Louis gets Jonathan Druins, changes scenery, and again, just at cap asset purposes. And
He did not fit well with the Islanders either. And he scored like right away, like nice goal right away with St. Louis, which was kind of cool to see. But
and then goalie prospect Marcus Goodwolf. Again, I can't pretend to tell you I know much about him, but again, first round pick, no retention, which I think is big for St. Louis there on the Shen deal. Shen's still a good player, but also not the same player that he once was. Age is definitely catching up a little bit. Little interesting that the Islanders were the one to make this move. Like, I don't mind them making an addition. I don't know if I don't think they gave up a ton, so I don't hate it, but it I don't know if Shen was maybe the best move for them. But
yeah,
again, I'm saying that, but I can't also tell you I like this another idea better.
yeah, that's fair. There's a level of like, okay, they knew they were sort of rebuilding, retooling, maybe is more correct for them. They didn't want to make moves that were just solely for this year. They kind of came out and said that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you have to make moves that impact you years to come, like this one. If they think it's the right fit, bringing in Shen, I think that's fine. I think in theory, this lets you put Barzal on the wing for good. You can have Horvat and Shen and Pajot. They signed to an extension right around the deadline, actually. So I if they are comfortable with that and Shen's kind of 2C, all right. I will, I guess, to keep adding on the positives, they could point to St. Louis and kind of say things have been down with St. Louis this year. A lot of guys aren't performing offensively, so maybe there's a little bit of a rebound in a playoff race with the Islanders. We'll see. I sort of I agree with you in saying like what other move is there for them to make at that point. So yeah, it's fine.
Well, I think that basically concludes a couple other like AHL swaps that I'm not gonna
No.
get too far into. I will say a little bit interesting. Maybe the last move that's listed on cap wages is the Rangers acquiring Eden Thompson from Chicago for Derek Pouliot. And I only bring that up because Thompson is significantly younger, still a restricted free agent, where Derek Pouliot's on the tail end of his career. So kind of an usually when you see those lower level swaps, it's similar age, just looking for a change of scenery or a different play style or something. This one is not that. So that is it a significant trade? No, but it does stand out just a little bit because you just don't often see that type of move.
What's interesting about that Is Thompson, he's 24, but this is his first full pro season, I should say. He played a few games last year at the pro level, but he dominated last season with Denver NCAA. Older player in the NCAA, but 15 points in 40 games so far this year in the AHL. Again, first full pro season. Why not? Like it's kind of one of those moves like for a team like the Rangers, all right, let's see if there's anything. If not, it's not a huge deal. You didn't really give much up. Maybe at the AHL level you kind of did, but I don't mind it. It could be one of those moves that we completely forget about in 3 years, or it's one of those sneaky ones that everyone talks about 3 years from now.
Yeah, just interesting that Chicago's the one giving up that prospect. Like if Buffalo had given that prospect up for Luke Shen, I'm not even. I mean, I'm bringing it up because it's an NHL player being acquired by Buffalo, but like not thinking twice, it makes sense. Just a
Right.
little bit interesting because Chicago acquired like an fringe NHL rental, but anyways, I think that's probably more than long enough for our trade deadline recap episode. We'll see maybe if we are able to squeeze in another recording at some point in the next couple of weeks. We will maybe do a looking to the summer names that were floated. So basically a Robert Thomas episode and discussion, but we'll see. We're kind of on a week by week recording session, so we'll definitely be back. If you don't hear from us again in the next couple of weeks, we'll definitely be back, hopefully, with our contract projections being released. We're not going away, just life's a little busy right now. So we're just gonna take it week by week. If we can squeeze in a session to record another episode, we'll gladly do it and bring it to you. Otherwise, probably take a few weeks off, month off, and be back with our contract projections, which will definitely be out again. I shouldn't say definitely, but aim will be to have them out early May as usual. So we appreciate you listening. Maximum Podcast available on all major podcast platforms. Our content, including contract projections and max that, available at afpanalytics.com. And if you have any questions around follow kind of our thoughts on content, socials, AFP Analytics on X, Blue Sky, Threads. We appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.